Good morning, everyone, and welcome to a WIOA Wednesday webinar. Today is our double feature. My name is Amy Julian. I'm at the Illinois Center for Specialized Professional Support at Illinois State University, and I'm going to be your moderator for today. Today's topic is the reentry portion. So checklist for reopening America's centers. Let me try that again. Checklist for reopening American job centers in Illinois. As a reminder, all participants are in listen-only mode. If you have questions during the webinar, please post those questions in the chat question box, or feel free to raise your hand and we will pause for questions as we progress through the webinar. In addition, this webinar is being recorded, and the presentation, recording, and materials presented in today's webinar will be available on the ICSPS website and also on Illinois WorkNet within 48 hours. And tomorrow, each of you will receive an email which includes a survey asking you about today's webinar. We really appreciate your feedback, and we use that for continuous improvement. So please complete that evaluation as you move forward. So as we start today, just a couple little housekeeping questions, not really housekeeping, but fun questions to ask you as we go. So where is your local area? And I'm going to send a poll out here. And go ahead, and if you'd like to complete that poll, where is your local area? So we want to see who you are and where you're from. Give everybody a couple seconds to respond to that. I'm going to go ahead and close the poll and share that out to kind of show people where we are from today. So good representation of kind of all over the state there. The next question we want to ask, and again, is a polling question. We want to see which partner do you represent? So I'm going to launch that poll here and go ahead and take a minute to answer that. All right, I'm going to go ahead and close the poll and share the results. Looks like the majority of the people on our call today are from Title I, and about 17% are state and local workforce innovation board people. So welcome, everyone. And so with that, I'm your moderator today, so you can see what I look like. This is Amy Julian coming to you from ISU. And I'm going to hand the floor over to Mitch, and he's going to go ahead and lead us through the day.
Thank you, Amy. So good morning, everyone, and welcome to an overview of the American Job Center's reopening checklist, as Amy stated. My name is Mitch Parrish, and I'm a consulting manager with Kerber, Eck & Brockle in our Springfield office. My colleagues, Bethany Yeager and Cameron Sweatman, as you may know, and myself, help facilitate WIOA interagency teams related to implementation of WIOA activities across the state. We also are on the webinar today are members of the Interagency Technical Assistance Team, Mike Baker, and I'm not sure if LaVon Nelson was able to log on or not, but they will be here to help field questions and draw particular attentions to any topics as we go along the webinar today. So today's webinar is designed to provide an orientation to the reopening checklist. If you haven't yet seen it, or if you have seen it, there have been some changes to the checklist, so we're going to discuss that. And then I understand that this, may be a lot of information all at once. So if you think of any questions throughout the webinar, feel free to write to our FAQ page at the end of this PowerPoint. The FAQ page enables the WIOA Interagency Technical Assistance Team to field questions and evolve whoever is needed best to respond to the questions in a timely manner. So now that we've discussed that, let's get into today's agenda. We're first going to go into some background information that aided us in creating the need for the checklist. We're going to then go step by step on how to access that checklist, that you know where it's at and how to get to it. Then we're also going to go through each section of the checklist one by one. Then we're going to finish up by discussing the attachments to the checklist. And at the end of the orientation, we're going to provide some resources as well as some contact information in that FAQ page. And hopefully we have some time to discuss some questions as well. So as we go to the next slide here, a little background information as to where the checklist came from. The state is currently in phase 4 of the Governor's Restore Illinois plan, but American Job Centers throughout the state vary in whether they're applying phase 3 or phase 4 guidelines at this time. So this is just a little excerpt of the 5 phases of the Governor's guidelines and plan. So we know that the virus has caused painful cascading consequences for everyone in Illinois, but we really hope that the reopening checklist will provide you with valuable insight and suggested safety measures to ease some of the burden that this pandemic has caused. So with that said, as we go through the checklist, we're going to focus mainly on phase 4 guidelines because that's where our state is. However, we can see here throughout the checklist that phase 3 has limited capacity and implements recommendations for increased safety measures, with face coverings being the norm, as we all know. And in addition, phase 3 suggests that gatherings of only up to 10 persons are to be permissible. However, now that we're in phase 4, we know that face coverings and personal protection equipment is still the norm. However, we increased that 10-person limit to up to 50 persons per the guidelines. So we'll go to the next slide here and talk a little bit more about some background information. The next slide incorporates, just showing you that we incorporated guidance from various federal and state agencies. So here's some of the agencies that we utilize guidance from. The checklist, as we built it, ensured that a variety of perspectives were heard when developing it, and that special attention was given to cross-checking guidance from various sources and linking the reopening checklist to the authoritative sources in Illinois to avoid contradictory guidance. In addition to that, and to the list of agencies, other state guidelines were utilized to consider best practices as far as we know today. And some of the states that were state guidance that was used were from Michigan, Tennessee, and Missouri. So with that said, some final background information on the next slide. An important note as we go through this checklist, reopening checklist, it is to serve as a guiding document for reopening of American Job Centers, and it is not mandatory, nor is it intended to be a law or governing rule. The document is specifically designed to provide guidance and resources for local areas, and also provide flexibility for you to use what works best for your area and your community. So we understand that the state of Illinois is very diverse, and so too are the American Job Centers within it. So we must reiterate, these are guidelines. However, as you can see on this page, there are 3 requirements that an American Job Center must meet and implement prior to reopening in any way. And that would mean by appointment only, limited occupancy, or being fully open to the public. So 1, they must ensure that there's adequate personal protection equipment or PPE available for all staff and customers throughout phase 3 and 4. Number 2, they must ensure the safety of staff. They must ensure the safety of staff and customers, including through designated on-site security personnel. And then 3, they must establish an agreed upon process for making decisions for a practical reopening that includes conversations with the leaseholder, one-stop operator, and required partners before deciding or announcing that an American Job Center will reopen to the public. So with a little bit of the background information covered, we're now going to go take you through the access steps to get to the checklist. So this slide here basically takes you to the illinoisworknet.com/WIOA webpage. So if you wanted to, you can follow along with us and actually go to that website, or you can follow along and just note these websites as we go. So once you've accessed that page, the next slide, you can click on the Visit the WIOA Implementation Workforce Professionals COVID-19 page, and it will take you to a new window that looks like this. This is a screenshot of the top portion of this page, as it is very large. And specifically, we want to draw your attention to the bottom left-hand corner of this screen, which is going to be our main focus today, which is accessing the reopening checklist. As you can see here, the checklist has been posted with and without track changes. We do this because we believe that the track changes are very important to keep the field informed of any updates and edits that are made to the document. So it's important to know that this document does change periodically as new guidance becomes available. So make sure that you check back when you want to utilize the checklist to guide your next decisions. We have also made it a priority to send any updates to our interagency technical assistance team, and then they are to distribute the checklist to their networks. So if any changes are made, there will be a good chance that you'll actually receive the updated checklist via email, or just via an email notifying you that there is an updated checklist on Illinois WorkNet. So I also wanted to point out some other resources on this page via the red arrows. You can access individual or employer specific pages. You can submit or read FAQs, which we discussed earlier, and there'll be a link to that FAQ page at the end of the presentation. And then there's also additional resources below this screenshot. So just know that there's a plentiful resources out there, and we've also linked this page at the end of the webinar as well. So now let's get into the checklist, and Amy's going to pull up the checklist here so we can go through it step by step. And it's also the checklist and the webinar. I believe Amy has put them out there for handouts, so feel free to print those out or save them. But now that we're in the checklist, you can see here, this is the first page of the checklist, and it offers a bit of background information, some of which we've already covered, like the 3 requirements for reopening. And you'll also notice that we footnote the date on the bottom right-hand corner for which the last updates were made. So you'll always know if you've had the latest update. So this checklist is also broken down into 3 main categories, which are center services, procedures, and staffing. And within each one of those categories, there's multiple categories to relate to it. So in phase 4, for in-person service delivery, this will be the second page of the checklist. The suggestion is that appointments are standard practice and walk-ins are permissible, as long as there's adequate PPE in place and readily available. AJCs also need to make sure that the staffing capacity will allow for traffic expected. And lastly, if unemployment services are necessary, customers should be advised to visit the IDES website or call their number on the screen. So you can see that we're in the phase 4 revitalization column as we go down through the checklist. The next topic here under center services is customer and staff screening. So in phase 4, it is critical to continue screening customers and staff upon entering the facility. We will discuss examples of screening in the later attachment of this checklist and webinar. But face coverings and social distancing are the norm, as we discussed earlier during this phase as well. And please also note that there are embedded links throughout this checklist, so feel free to click on those links. They're going to take you to applicable resources that support the suggested guideline and other resources if needed. So as we scroll to the next page, we can see that orientations, workshops, and hiring events is the next topic here. And in phase 4, meetings are permissible. However, staffing and customers are limited based on center occupancy for 50 persons, whichever is less. So again, face coverings and social distancing remain the norm, and occupancy is going to be discussed at a later time as well. Next, we discuss procedures here. As we've stated during phase 4, PPE and social distancing are still the norm and are critical for us to implement in order for us to move into the next phase. The next topic under procedures is COVID-19 cases. Here, the guidelines suggest that the one-stop operator develops procedures and trains staff on how to respond if a staff member or customer become ill or test positive for the virus. The one-stop operator shall contact their local health facility if a known risk of infection occurs. There are additional resources that will be discussed at a later time in this reopening checklist. Next is limited occupancy. We've already mentioned this, but specific guidelines are referenced here that support staffing and attendance levels be limited to 50% of the building occupancy. Again, this is a guideline and should be taken into consideration for safety measures upon reopening. As we scroll to the next page here, sanitation and cleaning is covered. And during phase 4, centers shall be adequately equipped with hand and surface sanitizer and make these available to all staff and customers. Work areas that are frequently visited should be sanitized after each use, and centers should be cleaned on a daily basis. The next topic here is signage. It is also an important safety precaution upon reopening. There's a link at the bottom of the page that will direct you to phase-specific signage, making it easy for you to access materials that you need for all situations and areas of your center. It's simply, you can go to this website and print out all sorts of PDFs that will help you with your signage needs. The next page takes us into the last category of staffing. First, let's look at training. In phase 4, staff should be trained on protocols including staff roles and responsibilities, safety procedures, as well as sanitation practices. Applicable resources for these activities are available at the end of the checklist as well. Next, personnel is discussed, and increased staffing levels may be needed in order to meet the demands of your customers. However, please be mindful of the previous categories that were discussed and the limits of occupancy and staffing levels. It is also important to have the necessary staff on hand, but safety and virus prevention are most important here as we implement reopening efforts. Remember, these are guidelines, and the American Job Centers must navigate the checklist to implement what works best for them and their community. The last topic is security. As one of the 3 requirements to implementing prior to the reopening of an American Job Center, increased on-site security remains the norm and may be necessary based on the needs of your area. Our Interagency Technical Assistance team is currently ensuing efforts to address concerns raised by the field regarding mandatory security measures, so be aware that language in this section may slightly change in the near future. So the next section of the checklist offers guidelines to safely serve vulnerable populations that utilize American Job Center services. So persons over the age of 60 years old or persons that have chronic health conditions should be served with utmost care and caution. So there's several guidelines listed here to help you navigate how to serve those populations. As we scroll down, we have listed several resources that encompass a wealth of information. There's handouts, FAQs, signage for AJCs, all to utilize as you plan to reopen the American Job Center. So now let's discuss the attachments to the checklist. As we scroll down, the first attachment discusses the signage and customer interaction. There's a link here included here on this attachment, and there are industry-specific signage templates that AJCs may utilize to post at their centers upon reopening, as we've already discussed. It is also important to use signs and posters to make customers aware of your rules and safety precautions. Also, there are a few customer interaction examples that are listed here to help you respond to a customer that may appear ill or sick, or if there's a situation that's getting out of control or hard to handle. There's a couple situations there that you can read through and guidance that'll help you navigate those situations. So the next attachment and the next page here discuss the sample customer and staff screening protocols. So as we discussed earlier, it is important to implement upon reopening your American Job Center. And there's also a reference link to direct you to the source document that aided in creating these questions and guidelines. So again, these are guidelines. Navigate through them and make sure that you're implementing what's best for your American Job Center and your community. So the last attachment proposes 3 job duties and responsibilities that other states have used to implement safety measures within the center. Again, it is important to understand that these are just guidelines and suggestions of best practices, and centers need to implement what makes most sense for their area. So I know that that was a ton of information. We walked through each step of the checklist. We went over some background information, covered the resources, and you can see, if you scroll down on the second to last page of the webinar will be that link to the FAQ page. Feel free to always submit questions to that page, and we do our best to get you the most timely answer. But if there's any questions that were posted that people want to discuss while we're on the air, we can take time to do that now.
Just a couple notes. Michael Baker posted the FAQ webpage in the chat, and the complete presentation as well as the document that we just viewed are available in your handouts. So if you click handouts, you can have PDFs of both of that information with active links. There do not appear to be any questions at this time. Again, you can post your questions in the question box or raise your hand and I will unmute you if you're confident your microphone is working. Don't see any questions at this time, Mitch.
Mike, did you have anything that you wanted to add to support the webinar?
Just a couple of quick comments. Obviously, it's important to be mindful of the current reopening phase that your particular community is in when you're consulting the guidance, because there are different things going on, and regions could regress back to phase 3. Hopefully not, but that potentially could happen. So just be mindful of what phase you're in. And also, as a resource, at the web page that Mitch mentioned, the link at the top of the page is showing now the implementation during COVID-19. We have provided the guidance the governor's office, departments of CMS and public health have provided to state agencies. So that is the guidance that state agencies like Employment Security, Voc Rehab, TANF, DCO, etc., are following. So this guidance and this checklist is designed to be flexible so that there is hopefully minimal conflict between guidance that's issued by different places. And if there is a minute conflict, we encourage you as partners in the one-stop, reach out to the one-stop operator and work out whatever questions or concerns different partners might have based on guidance that might be being interpreted differently. So really, this is all on you all to make this work, and we're here to support and to help, but you guys are the ones that are responsible for making it happen. So with that, I'll turn it back to Mitch. Thanks.
Thanks, Mike. Great point. I just want to reiterate, utilize that FAQ page, bookmark it. We get notifications from it right away when you submit a question, and we jump on getting you an answer, as soon as possible. So feel free to use that as you're reopening or as you're planning to reopen. Utilize this document, utilize the resources within it. And if there's no other questions, Amy, we can adjourn.
We have one question that came in. Any guidance on temperature screening that you could provide?
Yeah, it's actually embedded in some of these resources. Mike, do you know? I know the Illinois Department of Public Health has, best practice for it.
Yes, this checklist is designed to refer to healthcare guidance provided by public health, which incorporates Centers for Disease Control guidance. So if you go to the links from Department of Public Health that are embedded in here, that's where the guidance on temperature taking is provided. And you could also go to the public health website also.
Yeah, these resources are, critical for reopening. I know that there is a actual checklist that included steps on, how to implement temperature checking. And again, that's a guideline. It's not mandatory, but again, that's a great safety precaution as you reopen your American Job Center. So if that's something you want to look into, utilize these resources. If you cannot find it, feel free to submit an FAQ, and I will make sure that I get you the exact web page link for those guidelines.
Yeah, I mean, and to follow up, we purposely did not put step-by-step guidance on all those kinds of minutia items in this checklist, because as we have seen since February, official guidance from healthcare experts has evolved as we've learned more about COVID and how it's spread and how it's not spread. So that's why we didn't go into all the details on how to do all this stuff in here. We just linked to the public health resources because that's where that officially is updated. So that's the rationale behind that.
Excellent. That was the questions that we have.
Wonderful. Thank you.
It does conclude our double feature webinar today. Again, the handouts are under handouts, and the recording as well as the resources will be posted on both the Illinois WorkNet site and the Illinois Center for Specialized Professional Support site. Thank you all so much. Have a great day.